the end of a perfect evening. But how do you say goodnight?
Don't, please.
Or it could go this way.
Well, so long.
Just like that. One more way.
I had loads of fun.
So did I.
Good night, Woody.
Night, Ann.
Does she love me with all her heart?
The instructional films of the 50s seemed to capture the spirit of the age. Dating do's and don'ts, and no sex outside of marriage. But were we really doing what we were supposed to be doing? Or was there something else going on?
Well, it's a lover's question I'd like to know. I'd like to know when she's not with me. Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Come on, baby, let me thrill your soul. Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Roll all night long. Come on, baby, yes, this is something I just can't miss. Come on, baby, let the good time roll. Roll all night long.
Come on, baby, while the thrill is on. Come on, baby, let's have some fun. Come on, baby. But this is our first date.
I know what you're going to say. I could tell you what you're going to say because I know what it is because I heard it before. You're going to say that I wouldn't respect you, right?
Well,
right? Listen, Ginny, I want to tell you right here and now that I would respect you like crazy. I would respect you. Listen, you can't even imagine how I would respect you. I just want to make that point very clear.
Are you sure you wouldn't just be grateful?
No!
I think like most red-blooded American boys, I was dedicating myself to a life of sin and generally failing. You're a young male, you know, in hormone overload in a period before the pill, remember, where every woman that you knew seemed to be protecting her virginity on moral grounds, but was really protecting it on practical grounds.
Okay.
Do you think you're going to go to college?
With boys, you had to really control the situation sexually. You know, nothing below the neck, you know, for certain boyfriends. So they could go only so far and no further. It was a huge decision if you finally decided to go all the way, which was what they called it then. It was a huge decision and a risk.
In the post-war era, local authorities in 50 American cities censored movies and banned books and comics dealing with sex or crime. TV censors forbade The Lucy Show to use the word pregnant, and the New York Times campaigned against the immodesty of bathing suits. Sex outside of marriage was a criminal act in many states, and doctors were jailed for discussing birth control with their patients.
The decade of the 50s was one of public repression and private liberty. I was in my early 30s. You felt that the matron across the dining table was getting ready for some sort of sexual adventure. You knew it wouldn't happen to you, but it was in the air. There was something in the air about opening up the society.
Well, take it easy. Oh, those cats.
The frank treatment of sex in A Streetcar Named Desire caused a sensation on Broadway and on the screen. The author of the play, Tennessee Williams, was openly homosexual in a period when that was a crime.
Hey, Stella!
A Streetcar Named Desire made it clear that men and women had strong sexual appetites that could not be contained by the social pressures of the time.
Streetcar really exploded on Broadway, and it reached one of the great squares of America in that era. A professor at Indiana University with a crew cut and a bow tie named Alfred Kinsey. He was immediately jolted by the play because he felt that he had been working in the same vineyard as Tennessee Williams, who was also trying to fight his way through all the myth and superstition and darkness so that sexuality could be brought out in the open, discussed, understood, and so much of the darkness wiped away.
You don't believe me, baby.
Alfred Kinsey was obsessed with sex. He had collected scores of erotic films and magazines and interviewed over 5,300 men about their sex lives. Behind the doors of his sex institute, Alfred Kinsey was trying to understand the irrepressible lust in the heart of America.
Did you say I've got a lot to learn? Well, don't think I'm trying not to learn. Since this is the perfect spot to learn. Oh, teach me tonight.
In 1948, Kinsey released his first findings, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male.
ABC of it.
Published in a small academic press, it was 804 pages with no pictures and weighed 3 pounds. But it became an overnight sensation and a bestseller. It was known simply as the Kinsey Report.
The Kinsey reports showed that Americans were doing what they weren't supposed to be doing.
Society was quite conservative. That's why people were outraged when we showed that the great majority of people had premarital intercourse and that the incidence of adultery was higher than anyone thought. And they're particularly vexed by our high incidence of homosexual activity.
Excited by the material, one Hollywood producer tried to option the report. An admirer sent Kinsey a come-hither telegram.
Anxious to meet you. Please telephone me. Warwick Hotel.
If Mae West had known Kinsey, she would have been disappointed. He was a Boy Scout who married the first girl he ever dated.
We always laughed when Mrs. Kinsey came in with anything. She once said to a New York Times reporter that she hardly ever saw her husband now that he had taken up sex.
On Sunday nights, the Kinseys would host a musicale. They invited professors and graduate students to sip tea and listen to records from their classical collection. But when the wife of one faculty member dared to suggest a boogie-woogie record, she was never invited back. As a biologist, Kinsey was a passionate collector, famous for categorizing edible wild plants and gall wasps. Kinsey's collecting would turn from insects to human beings when he was asked to teach the biology section of a popular 50s phenomenon, the marriage course.
I needed a marriage course. When we grew up, your parents never told you anything about sex.
That's right. That's right.
It was not talked about. And I thought, well, I guess it's time I learned something.
Students came to me with questions concerning sex. They wanted scientific data. I went to the scientific data, and I discovered that there was practically nothing known about human sexual behavior in comparison with what we knew about the sexual behavior of other animals and in comparison with what we knew about the activities of other parts of the human body.
I don't know what she's going to say.
Well, I thought, oh, you could get pregnant by just being close to somebody. That's how naive I was.
I'll bet we could get some advice from the marriage counselor over at the church. His name is Hall. Phil told me about him. He teaches a course in marriage and family living at the college.
It was probably
simply an early physical reaction, a romantic attraction that pulled you together, a love appeal that hits you sort of boing. But it takes more than this boing. For you see, if you're too far apart psychologically, if your backgrounds are not similar enough, it can cause a great deal of argument and unhappiness until it's gone.
Where'd it go?
That's what
We
you
had a
may
course
think.
called Modern Living, which was taught by our dean, Dean McIntosh. She gave a lecture on the reproductive organs, you know, and I remember we were going to be tested on this and running, you know, running down Broadway toward the hall where we were going to be tested and running into a classmate of mine who said, "Quick, what are the male sex organs?"
Kinsey's concerns about sexual ignorance drove him to scientific research. With financial support from the Rockefeller Foundation, he established the Kinsey Institute for Sex Research to assemble, collate, and analyze sex histories from a broad cross-section of American men and women. Struck by the tensions between sexual habits and the social mores of the time, Kinsey was fascinated by the phenomenon of petting. In the 40s and 50s, petting was condemned by law in every American state and practiced by 95% of young adults.
Within the safety of a steady relationship, young people necked and petted and explored sexually as long as the line wasn't crossed, as long as the girl or the woman remained technically a virgin.
Look, you're going to give me goosebumps.
Really?
I'll cut it out.
Never. Coward?
Oh, really?
Both boys and girls are mature many years before the average age of marriage. What sort of advice can we give for teenagers to reconcile the difference between their biological development and our social demands upon them at that age?
The key to Kinsey's research was the taking of sex histories. At a time when the very mention of sex was taboo, Kinsey had to persuade people to reveal the most intimate details of their lives.
He was a champion at rapport building. He would be very casual, as though he had all the time in the world. When it came time for the questions, he would always look you square in the eye. So he would gain the confidence by a kind of non-judgmental quality that he had.
When I did my interview with him, I felt no embarrassment. He just made you feel very comfortable. And I wasn't used to talking about sex, and I just felt okay.
He was exhilarated by this work, by finding out, by going into the darkness. I mean, I think Kinsey must have thought of himself like an explorer on a new continent.
The Magellan of the bedroom, Alfred Kinsey set out to map America's uncharted sexual territory.
Come on over, baby. Whole lot of shaking going on.
Kinsey listened to the sex lives of farmers and housewives, professors and prostitutes, churchgoers and convicts. In Chicago, he disappeared from view when he discovered an enormous gay subculture forced underground.
And he just disappeared. No one knew he was doing this. And found, he spent 5 days, it's an extraordinary picture, really. This stooped, scholarly professor of 45, and he picked up 3 men, I think, in 5 days. He didn't want sex with them. He wanted to find out about what they did.
With his bow tie and crew cut, Kinsey became a recognizable figure in the gay bars around New York's Times Square. To find willing interview subjects, he hired a local hustler named Herbert Hunky.
A hunky was sort of a scout to bring people in from Times Square at, I don't know, $5 a head or something like that. And Kinsey had come to focus just during this small, short period of time on the floating population of Times Square, because there were a lot of hustlers, a few junkies, women of the evening. a very tolerant atmosphere, a very healthy atmosphere, actually, not at all like now. Not sleazy, or not that sleazy. And so Burroughs and Kerouac and I were all interviewed for the Kinsey report. And Dr. Kinsey interviewed me, actually. So we're built into these statistics, sexual activity of the American male.
Homosexuals are very friendly, and were particularly friendly then, I think. And this you notice right through as he gets into them. To find someone who appreciated them, was interested in them, did not condemn them. They flocked to him, you know.
In 1953, Kinsey braced himself for the reaction to his second volume, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. The press and public awaited its release with anticipation and fear.
The heat is on, the heat is on. You better not get near my lips tonight. I've got a kiss like a flame. And if you touch my lips, you might ignite, and you would have yourself to blame. The heat is on.
A very high percentage of women were having sex before marriage, albeit with men to whom they were engaged. A very high percentage of women were petting with men, you know, that they weren't engaged to.
Got an awful lot of oats that haven't been sown. They might start a chain.
Out comes Kinsey, and says this wonderful woman, she sleeps with people outside her marriage. In a sense, a very earthy, you know, useful, down-to-earth corrective. Well, America couldn't take it.
That the heat is on.
In our society back in those days, we still had this sort of good girl, bad girl dichotomy. You know, they were either Madonnas or whores or something. And it upset people to find that most women were in between.
Have you formed any opinions about the book as a result of your reading?
I wouldn't like to read the book.
You would not like to
No.
read it? Do you approve or disapprove of the book?
I disapprove of it. I think he speaks to the wrong kind of people, because I don't think the average person feels that way.
I think it's a waste of a brilliant man's time and money, and I don't think that any decent woman would give a man her opinions on such a matter. I know I wouldn't.
I think it's a good thing. I think the more you know about anything, the better you can do it, and the better you do it, the more successful you are, irrespective of what it is. If Kinsey wouldn't spend so much time on sex, he'd have a little much more time for his wife. I think ignorance is the thing that's wrong, not the knowledge about anything. Whether or not you agree with it isn't the point. It's the knowledge of it that makes it important. Then after you know about it, then you form your opinion.
Kinsey became a kind of pop star, drawing enormous crowds for his lectures on sexual behavior. Polls showed that a majority of Americans supported Kinsey's work, and inquisitive readers turned the female volume into another bestseller. The criticism for the second volume was much more hostile than for the first. Clergymen attacked him on moral grounds, calling his work animalistic. One congressman said the book contributed to the depravity of a whole generation and convened a committee to demand that the post office bar the book from the mails.
Some of this came up in a congressional subcommittee. We were insulting American womanhood. All of this destruction of our Judeo-Christian morality, which we were attempting to do, obviously, would result in making it easier for a communist takeover.
Kinsey began to realize that he was under siege and that his funding might be cut off. And at that point, I think he became extremely sensitive, and he tried to get the people from the Rockefeller Foundation to come out to Bloomington to see what they were doing. But it was very threatening because he was suggesting things about the daily fabric of their lives. Kinsey was saying, "Sir, it's in your own home."
Late in 1953, Kinsey lost the support of the Rockefeller Foundation.
Why do you whisper green grass? Why tell the trees what ain't so? Whispering grass, the trees don't have to know. No, no.
Kinsey tried to compensate by working harder. As he began to suffer from insomnia, his friends begged him to slow down. But he refused, and only 3 years after the female volume was published, his heart gave out.
Mona Lisa, men have named you. You're so like the lady with the mystic smile. Is it only 'cause you're lonely they have blamed you for that Mona Lisa strangeness in your smile? Do you smile to tempt a lover, Mona Lisa? Or is this your way to hide a broken heart? Many dreams have been brought to your doorstep. They just lie there and they die there. Are you warm? Are you real? Mona Lisa are just a cold, lonely, lovely work of art.
She's an enormously luminescent figure because there is both the stunning beauty and sexuality, and then at the same time with her, the vulnerability. She arrived at the right moment when the country was about to renegotiate its Calvinist Puritan origins. I mean, she's a great comedian, so that she's at once sexual and she's also mocking that sexuality.
Is there anything I can do for you? What a ridiculous statement.
Mr. Grenion, I want you to help me.
I have a little sand left. What seems to be the trouble?
Some men are following me.
Really? I can't understand why.
Like Mona Lisa, Marilyn's appeal depended on what men read into her smile. I've never fooled anyone, she once said. I let men fool themselves. They were obviously loving someone I wasn't. When they found this out, they would blame me for disillusioning them. She was both innocent and deeply sexual. Like Kinsey, her troubles began when she was caught between the way things really were and the way they were supposed to be. In 1949, needing $50 to pay for her second-hand car, Marilyn agreed to pose in the nude for a photographer named Tom Kelly.
Kelly remembered that she was nervous that the nudity might hurt her career, and I guess he talked her out of it, and she took off her clothes, and out of that came this famous calendar cover, as she later said, with nothing on but the radio.
The calendar photo became famous, but for many years, no one knew that it was Marilyn. So her career as America's most wholesome sex symbol continued to soar. Late in 1952, Fox received an anonymous phone call from a blackmailer threatening to reveal that Marilyn was the calendar nude. Saying it would destroy her career, Fox pressured Marilyn to deny it. But Marilyn's response surprised everyone. When Marilyn told the truth, her fans embraced her for it. Americans seemed to want more honest talk about sex, a popular attitude that would be exploited by another.
One of the people who saw that great Marilyn Monroe calendar was a repressed, sexually obsessed young square in Chicago, a failed cartoonist named Hugh Hefner.
From a small apartment in Chicago, Hugh Hefner watched the Marilyn controversy with great interest. Though he had no money and little experience in publishing, he believed that if he could find a way to buy the rights to the calendar photo, he could launch a magazine that would challenge the repressive sexual climate of the 1950s. Marilyn Monroe would be the lure for readers whom Hefner hoped would share his fantasies of a lifestyle blending fast cars and philosophy, men's clothes, and naked women.
I discovered that the John Baumgarth Company, a calendar company that was located very close to where I grew up on the west side of Chicago, owned the rights to the Tom Kelly calendar picture. So I went out there and I walked out of there with the rights to reproduce the picture for $500, and he threw in the color separations. Now, the color separations would have cost me more than $1,000 by themselves.
Because of the Monroe photo, every young male of 19, 20 went out and bought a copy. I think they had thought maybe if they could sell 30,000 copies, they'd be lucky. And they sold 53,000. And he was in business. He went out and bought a used Studebaker car, and he now had a magazine and a kind of crusade.
Hefner wanted to take sex out of the dark, to make it as wholesome as a party game. Sex can be fun, said Playboy, if you don't think it's a sin.
I think there's a direct connection between my attitudes towards sexual repression and Playboy and the very repressive Puritan home that I grew up in. My home was a typically Midwestern, Methodist, very repressed home in which no emotion was shown in the home, and sex was a subject that was simply never talked about.
There was no drinking, smoking, or swearing in the Hefner household. Outside the house, when his mother took Hefner to the local swimming pool, she was uncomfortable at the sight of so much naked flesh.
When I was very young, I equated love of any form to the romantic love that I saw in the movies when I was a kid growing up.
Good morning. I love you.
Good morning. I love you.
I saw Tarzan and his mate in 1934. And that connection between man, woman, animals, nature, had tremendous meaning for me when I was a kid.
Are you sure there isn't another woman?
Woman? Man.
That's the way it should be, Tarzan.
Hefner married the first girl he slept with, but after 2 children, the relationship soured. Suddenly, he felt trapped, a prisoner of marriage.
Trapped? Is that what marrying me means to you, a trap?
Well, in a way, yes.
You don't care about anything or anybody but yourself.
Wait a minute.
No, I'm not going to trap you. I won't be a ball and chain around your neck. You're free. You're free as a bird, and you can do whatever you want to do.
Ellen. Ellen.
Freedom from marriage is what Hefner was after. In the 50s, that was a radical idea. Sex without obligation.
Our first story will come from the 30-year-old brain behind the hottest property in the publishing world. He's Hugh Hefner, editor and publisher of Playboy magazine. By occupation, he's an expert on American women. Chicago Magazine quoted you to the effect that sex will always be a primary ingredient of the magazine. Isn't that really what you're selling, kind of a high-class, dirty book?
No, I don't think so at all. There's an important distinction here.
Oh, with this, I think that you'll agree. It's a sniggering kind of sex. It's a lascivious kind of sex. It certainly isn't a healthy approach to sex. You suggest that it is.
I would not only suggest it, I would say rather strongly. We consider it a pretty healthy attitude.
Pretty healthy.
He was going to free the sexual slaves. I thought it an adolescent notion at the time, and it made me vaguely uncomfortable. By the time he went on Nightbeat in 1956, Hefner had struck a nerve in America. He was willing to talk openly about some of the things that had been, in a sense, forbidden.
We like our partner. We enjoy mixing up a cocktail with an hors d'oeuvre or two.
putting a little mood music on the phonograph, and inviting in a female for a quiet discussion on Picasso, Nietzsche, jazz, sex.
Can't you just see the young woman who's been invited to come in from across the hall, and she just gets a telephone call from her parents back in Terre Haute, and she says, I have to run. And they say, why? I'm calling you. And she said, no, I have to go across the hall to talk about Nietzsche with Hugh Hefner.
Playboy made it clear that finding playmates was easier if you had the right accessories. Playboy offered instant sophistication, initiating young men in a fraternity of style.
I always thought the most important thing in Playboy practically was the Playboy advisor. For many of the people who were first-generation college educated, their parents hadn't been to college, it was teaching them, I'm going out to dinner, we're having roast beef. Do I order a red wine or a white wine? The check is broad. How much do I tip? Do I tip the wine steward? It was how to come to terms in an age where you're more affluent, to get the accompanying sophistication to go with it. And he was teaching them also to try and do it with pleasure, to enjoy it, to enjoy this new, more materialistic, more affluent American century.
I think all through my life, before I started Playboy, I was unfocused and very uncertain as to what I was going to do. From the moment in which I decided I was going to do Playboy, it was almost like I changed into a different person.
I dig chicks. A chick's a man's best friend. I dig chicks. To me, chicks are the end. I dig dogs.
Hefner reinvented himself as the hero in a male sex fantasy, one that all of the magazine's readers could share.
I dig Polly and Molly, and by golly, I dig Mildred too.
The message in the centerfold, quite frankly, was good girls like sex too. And that, of course, is very, very revolutionary because, you know, we had that dualism in our religious heritage that suggested that only bad girls like sex.
Playboy's Girl Next Door was the ultimate fantasy. Through Hefner's magical looking glass, every bank teller and every librarian could become a beautiful and willing playmate.
Stepping briskly into an LA library, we found our eyes dazzled. The part-time librarian who offered us informed assistance struck us immediately as playmate potential.
One never had a sense that there was any laughter or joy to it. He seemed very much the modern descendant of that same Calvinist ethic, although trying to turn it around on sexuality.
Hefner cast himself as a leader of the sexual revolution, but he seemed uncomfortable with the role. In a TV series he produced, Hefner strained to work the room as if a stranger at his own party.
Hello there. Welcome to Playboy's Penthouse. I'm Hugh Hefner, editor publisher of Playboy magazine. And Playboy's rabbit...
To me, he never seemed like a fellow who had much fun. He'd have these huge parties full of these ladies in bouffant hairdos and very, very heavy superstructures. And everybody would be running around drinking. And Huey would be there puffing his pipe and guzzling his perennial bottle of Pepsi-Cola. But he always reminded me of a sober businessman, the sort of pious Methodist businessman who in the early frontier days would have gone to church and made a lot of money selling liquor to the Indians on the side.
Playboy offered an appealing fantasy to men in the 50s, but the girls next door were hardly that. They were airbrushed paintings of distant bodies, seemingly available but never attainable, except for one man, Hugh Hefner. captured them all under his magnifying glass.
Are you warm? Are you real, Mona Lisa? Are just a cold and lonely, lovely work of art? Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa.
Tonight, we go after the story of the woman who violated convention and bucked powerful opposition to lead the birth control movement in America. You see her behind me. She's Mrs. Margaret Sanger, who was thrown into jail 8 different times for her efforts.
When we decided to book Margaret Sanger, the sponsor, Philip Morris, was not especially happy. And the network was not especially happy because it was well known that she had an antipathy toward the Catholic Church on the issue of birth control.
They're celibates. They don't know love. They don't know marriage. They know nothing about bringing up children or any of the marriage problems of life. And yet they speak to people as if they were God.
Well, the natural law, they say, is that, first of all, the primary function of sex in marriage is to beget children. Do you disagree with that?
I disagree with it 100%.
Your feeling is what, then?
My feeling is that love and the attraction between men and women, in many cases, the very finest relationship, has nothing to do with bearing a child. It's secondary.
You simply had to admire her for the courage that she showed, for the determination that she showed, and not just on that half-hour broadcast, but what her life had been.
Margaret Sanger's commitment to birth control began when she was a child, traumatized by the death of her mother.
Margaret Sanger's mother died at the age of 49. I like to say died of old age because she had had 18 pregnancies, 11 of them bringing forth children, 7 of them resulting in miscarriages. And there's a family story that says that Margaret Sanger leaned across her mother's coffin at the funeral, pointing directly at her father and saying, "You caused this."
As a nurse in the tenements of New York's Lower East Side, Margaret Sanger saw other families like hers.
Dear Mrs. Sanger, I am 30 years old and have been married 14 years and have 11 children. If I could tell you all the terrible things that I have been through with my babies and children, you would know why I would rather die than have another one. So please, pity me and help me.
Dedicating her life to educating women about birth control, Sanger became a notorious crusader. For more than 20 years, she sought her own holy grail, a birth control pill that women could swallow as easily as aspirin. In the 50s, with money from a sympathetic heiress, Sanger went looking for a scientist to turn her dreams into a reality. The man she found was Gregory Pincus. An expert in reproduction, Pincus was famous for a 1939 experiment in which he astounded the world by fertilizing rabbit eggs in a test tube.
He was on the frontier of work in genetics, and it made people uneasy. There were attempts to caricature him in the popular press as a kind of Frankenstein who would, create children without fathers.
The hysterical reaction to Pincus's experiments helped push him out of Harvard University. By the time Sanger and McCormick found him, Pincus was doing basic research in Massachusetts in a group of old houses known as the Worcester Foundation. Margaret Sanger arranged a dinner with Pincus and asked him if it was possible to make a birth control pill. Pincus said it was, and that he was the man to do it. When his wife was skeptical about the prospect of such a pill, Pincus responded, "Lizushka, in science, everything is possible." Much of the scientific work had already been done. In Mexico, in the roots of yams, a renegade scientist had discovered a cheap and plentiful source of progesterone, the hormone released by females during pregnancy to prevent conception. Pincus knew that it was possible for women to gain birth control by taking doses of progesterone and so fooling their bodies into thinking they were pregnant, even when they weren't.
I once heard someone say that genius involved taking the old facts and looking at them in a new way. And I think that what my father did in this instance was take information he was already aware of and knew about and be able to look at it from a different perspective. That was his genius.
There were social problems. In Massachusetts, the transmission of information on birth control was a felony, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. The work that was being done in the Worcester Foundation could not even be discussed in polite conversation. Medical terms on reproductive biology were largely unknown to the general public.
Church groups and school groups would come through here. One time they came, and we were castrating hundreds of rats. And they were so enchanted with all these testes that we kept taking out and throwing off to one side. And they have a beautiful blood pattern on them. So they wanted to know more and more and more about this. And I couldn't explain it to them in terms that were socially acceptable. I tried everything. Finally, I got down to 4-letter words. And I got greeted. Each group, either it was dead silence or it was giggles. There was nothing in between. But it was the kind of language that nobody ever spoke.
By the late 50s, Pincus was ready to do extensive human field trials on the use of the pill.
They knew they could not do the trials in the United States. In the state of Massachusetts, where they both were located, it would be absolutely illegal to be looking for a contraceptive.
The first trials were conducted in Puerto Rico and Haiti. Both countries invited Pincus in because of their concern about the dangers of overpopulation. Pincus's daughter, Laura, helped with the trials.
There was a woman there whose husband was the head of tourism. She was a social worker. She was the social worker for the new clinic. And as we drove through the streets in her chauffeur-driven car, people hung on to the car, begging for information about birth control.
19-year-old girls with 10 children, all by different fathers. They were desperate.
In 1960, Sanger's dream was realized when the pill was approved for use. The pill was effective in combating birth rates, but evidence suggested that something else was going on.
In the town of Northborough, where Pincus lived, the pills were being used by the daughters with aspirin being substituted for the mother's little box, with the mother subsequently getting pregnant.
The real impact of the pill would be felt by young women who would find a sexual freedom their mothers could only have dreamed of.
I mean, I thought we were going to help these people that had all the children they wanted and had more than they wanted, didn't want any more. That's what I thought we were doing. I didn't think we were going to turn the world upside down.
The advent of the pill was part of a bigger change in American society, a breaking free of old bonds and restrictions. While rhythm and blues was changing the beat of American music, Southern blacks were demanding their civil rights. An attempted ban on a poem called Howl was struck down, and Brigitte Bardot first appeared on American screens. Elvis the Pelvis was topping the American music charts at the very same time that Goody Pincus and Margaret Sanger were handing out their first birth control pill.
I thought all the things that contributed to the sexual revolution in the 60s were seeded in the 50s. It was an increasingly sophisticated society that was trying to push down the barriers of this narrow Puritanism. And then, of course, when you had the dramatic change in technology with the coming of the pill, the explosion took place. The revolution came on.